currently with Bird Buddy, one of the things that I'm sure is complicated is, how do you balance compliance with your general like seamless customer experience, right? Do you have any tips of the trade of like how you've been dealing with those issues when you do have a customer that comes up and says, hey, well, you didn't charge me last month, so you're charging me now?
I think it's really kind of a case by case basis, and luckily, I haven't had too many tickets forwarded from our customer service team of issues where people are kind of complaining about being charged sales tax. I don't think I've ever come across a customer that complained about not being charged sales tax. But really, it's just a question of just having the process set up and be consistent with charging sales tax and making sure that our invoices are quite clear that, okay, you're paying X amount for the feeder, X amount for the seeds, X amount for shipping, and then sales tax is charged based on this. And we try to have our invoices be as clear as possible to the customer to kind of alleviate any concerns and kind of head off any questions.
Yeah, and I think that's a great tip. Like separately stating and making sure that your invoices are clear. We've talked a lot about how there's varying differences throughout the states, and that's the key part in making sure that you're charging sales tax really is making sure that it's itemized essentially,
Mm,
right?
right.
So love hearing. Do you have any experiences with exemptions or customers that are exempt?
Yes. We do have a growing B2B business where we're selling to some major retailers in the US, and we're then selling the products on our behalf. So we do collect exemption forms from each of our B2B customers, and we're able to then note that in our software that um, while we're still having sales, they're non-taxable sales because, again, we have to report all of our sales regardless of whether they're taxed or not. So by collecting the exemption forms and making sure they're properly filled out and signed and dated and currently in effect, because we've learned that some have blanket exemptions that last forever and some are just expire every year. So we want to make sure that we're collecting them and holding them in a timely basis and able to find them in case sales tax audit comes up and there's any issues there. We're able to have all that support ready and good to go. But yeah, basically just making sure that everything is documented correctly and everything's up to date.
Yeah. Yeah, one of the things that we see is there's generally two ways that I see a lot of our clients and businesses kind of handle exemptions is really a manual side, right? Where like you're collecting them, you're reviewing them, you're following up or keeping some sort of tracking schedule of when they expire, if they expire, are they blankets, who were they signed by, so on and so forth, right? And then there's also the other side of like automating it, right? We talked a little bit about compliance and automating your compliance, and there are softwares, right, that are available that can do that, but it falls kind of in line with the same conversation that we were having earlier is somebody still has to keep track, right? Somebody still has to know what's going on there and be abreast of the different changes. We are seeing that, like you had mentioned, like the blanket exemptions to exist, right? And those kind of are in existence until your license is withdrawn, right? Where there are other states though that do have limits on them. They do only are only valid for a year or so on and so forth. Like Florida, for example, where you have to print one out every year and it expires every year. So, there's a lot when it comes to the exemption space and how to handle it. But it's kind of in your position as you're growing and this B2B, like, it's one of those things that just kind of is added on the business to be able to manage and to take care of and to retain, right? So, throughout the years, it probably will become a little bit easier and harder for you as you start to expand this type of business for yourself.
Right.
Yeah, it's always exciting when companies have a good grasp of what to do next when you take that that step with B2B businesses, and your understanding of, let's make sure we have those exemption certificates, right? Let's make sure we have it managed properly. Let's make sure all of our sales are flowing through our system to properly report our gross receipts, even though they're not taxable, because a lot of times under audit, right, an audit can be picked up because your gross receipts don't match your sales tax returns and your business tax returns. And that's a good way for an audit to be flagged, as well as under audit not having those exemption certificates collected could be a big headache for the business. So seeing companies on top of that is always exciting in our space.
Right.
100%. And also, well, have you had to deal with providing exemption certificates for BirdBuddy or any of the other businesses that you've worked with?
Providing no.
Okay.
Never
Because I was going to say that
for
the other
a retail business, so it's definitely
yeah, no, I mean, that's the other fun side of it, right? Is certain states only allow you to provide an exemption certificate if you're registered. I brought up Florida as a perfect example. Like, you can't get that exemption certificate unless you're physically registered for a sales and use tax in the state, for at least for resale, right? So, that's something, that companies have to deal with as well, as when you have certain items that you're purchasing that maybe you're incorporating into that final product, right? And you want to provide a resale certificate, you might actually need to be registered in order to even provide that exemption certificate. So it becomes almost like an animal of its own.
right.
Like Bria mentioned, it's always great to hear when we are working with our clients or our businesses that are, abreast that or understanding of the exemption process, right? But it's also ever changing on that front too. Like, it's not just your sales tax rates that change; it's also all your exemptions that kind of change too throughout the years, and the forms change too. There are expired forms. Sometimes we get some audits where the auditors are like, "Yeah, can they get an updated form?" So it's always a fun experience.
Right.
So one of the things that I always like to hear, is do you have any like tips and advice for other businesses that are out there that are, just starting the process in the e-commerce space of implementing a sales and use tax automation or automatic solution, I guess is what we would say, automatic solution, right? So,
I think it goes back to what I said earlier, and just knowing kind of what you're good at and what you're an expert in, and knowing what you're not an expert in, and hopefully some experts like the team at Withum that helps me out with various excuse me, various areas that I'm not super familiar with and don't have a complete grasp of, or don't really even have the bandwidth to get too involved with, and knowing when to ask questions and get the experts involved and get them in part of the process, and kind of see what their recommendations are, whether you should be signing up for various third-party software to handle the automation, or if the business is still small enough, maybe you can just do it manually for the first year that the business is in, but really to kind of weigh your options as soon as possible and get a good understanding of kind of which way you should go. And if you need to have a little more pain by setting up that third-party software now for not a ton of sales to kind of justify it, but you have a lot of hope and faith in growing the business 4x, 5x, 10x. You want to just set things up now and then not have to worry about it 6 months, 1 year down the road.
yeah, no, I could not echo that sentiment more than what you just said. I'm like a big advocate for one, surrounding yourself with people who know what they're doing, right? Or, I always say it's smarter than I am, right? Because you can always have, additional opinions to kind of help field what your decision is as a business, right? Because there's plenty of paths to take. There's never really one that's just the only that you can take, right? But also, just understanding what the options are is major. I'm always about, getting a couple quotes of maybe different softwares, because they all kind of function a little bit different, right? And in terms of not just their pricing, but also what is available, and how they function. So, understanding the different options that are available, and you nailed it right on the head. It's almost like you took it from one of our meetings where I always say, like, the sales tax price up front, it's hefty, right? Like putting in something and putting in an automation system, and kind of getting everything, all your ducks lined up, definitely is costly for a business, unfortunately. But the long-term effect of having everything set up in the beginning just saves you so much money down the road, right? Especially because, God forbid, a lot of the things that we've been talking about, not collecting or reflecting, like having to deal with all of that process, not collecting exemption certificates, getting audited, and having to go back to your customers that no longer exist, right? So all of that can be so complicated and costly ultimately for a business down the road. And if you put in the time, the effort in the beginning to kind of get those things in place, it really just makes it so much less painful, as you go throughout the process of growing the business, right? Go ahead, Brianna.
Businesses, right? Your goal is to grow. Your goal is to exceed your prior year. And ultimately, when you continue to grow, if you aren't handling your sales tax implications, then that continues to grow. Your potential exposure continues to grow. Sales tax, not to get too technical, but sales tax is a trust, and it's a tax that ultimately is on the founders and the officers of the company if there were any mistakes made or if there was anything not collected that should have been collected. So getting on top of everything at the beginning and any sales tax implications on the business at the beginning is gonna stop those headaches down the line when your intentions are to continue to grow and flourish as a business. And even under due diligence, if you ever go to sell your business, or that's the approach that a business wants to take in the future, right? Sales tax holds up some of those due diligence deals, so it's super important just at the forefront, getting it handled and understanding that those costs are going to tenfold down the line if it is not handled accordingly.
Exactly. Yeah, I've dealt with that during due diligence of potential exposure in U.S. and especially abroad, where that is a whole other animal. Then that, especially being here based here in the U.S. and working for American companies that some have international operations, some do not, and trying to handle all of that yourself is just an impossible task. So it's where, again, you really have to rely on the experts and get their advice and kind of come up with a game plan altogether to move forward.
Like, we didn't really talk too much about due diligence, but that's one of the biggest things that tends to hold up deals, right? Is not handling sales and use tax, and then trying to handle sales and use tax when you're under due diligence. It's so crammed and it's rushed, and it's you don't get a second to breathe when you're trying to handle it under circumstances. So 100% correct. I think one of the last questions that I kind of have for you truly is, we talked about a lot of, the advice that you offered, which is really, getting other people in the mix to help progress and to make sure that things are put into place correctly. But is there any other advice that you might have for a business that's trying to just navigate in this space of sales and use tax and the changes that you've seen?
I think the biggest thing would be to realize that you're not alone, and other companies are facing the same issues you are, and not everyone is going to be 100% compliant across the country, and there's always some issue that maybe some product wasn't being taxed at the correct rate, or maybe you aren't actually turned on collections for a time period and something didn't get remade correctly. So I think to kind of look at the overall big picture and again realize that all the states should want to work with you and resolve any kind of issues, and understand that companies aren't in the sales tax business. We're not here to just pay sales tax. We're here to sell a product that we're passionate about and make our customers happy and everything that goes along with that. And while sales tax is an important part of the business, it shouldn't drive the business. And compliance is, we want to be compliant with everything, but we can't, compliance isn't number one, and I don't think should be number one.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, you definitely can't make all your business decisions based on sales tax, right?
Right.
There's many other factors that are involved when it comes to growing and developing a business. So
Thanks for having me here. I've enjoyed talking to you, and I've enjoyed working with you and continue to work with you in the future and deal with issues as they come up and realize that the sky isn't falling and we'll tackle things as they come along and it won't be a problem.
Well, Steve, thank you so much for joining us on today's Withum eSuites interview episode. It's been a pleasure speaking with you and getting a better understanding from your side of sales and use tax in the e-commerce space.
we appreciate your time.
Well, thank you.